Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast. We have just Jeff Dornik with us today. He's a CEO at Pickax in California. So, yeah, Pickax is a constitutionally protected free speech social content platform. It's focused on protecting the First Amendment, using technology to build up people's voice instead of people using people to build up technology. I guess there's a bunch of these other platforms out there. I think the Truth was one of these. I also had the Tusk browser CEO on a conversation the other day. So, Jeff, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you've been up to as of late.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I've been looking forward to chatting with you. I think, for me, historically, I've been in politics and always talked about like a lot of the controversial issues, and especially during COVID, I interviewed a lot of the COVID doctors, Dr. Pierre, Corey, McCullough, just go down the list. I've talked to them all. And so definitely faced my, my share of censorship, got kicked off of X for a while. YouTube won't let me on there, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of it is just because I'm asking questions. A lot of times I'm not necessarily coming up with the answers. I'm just asking the wrong questions that people don't necessarily want me to ask. So then I came up with this idea to start a social media platform that hinges on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, but then also this idea of freedom of reach. So if you look at like platforms like X and Facebook, they're trying to come out and say that they're free speech, but they have a clause. If you can go look at the terms and conditions on X right now, there's a phrase in there that they use that's freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach, which means they'll let you say what you want, but that doesn't mean that they actually have to let people see it. And so to me, that flies directly in the face of the First Amendment, of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and all that. So our idea is, as long as it's legal, you're not like threatening somebody, you're not doxing somebody, you're not doing something like that, you should be allowed to state your opinions freely without restriction. And even if it's an unpopular opinion, we're not going to get in between you and the following that you've developed to limit their ability to actually see your content. If you've earned a following, then you've earned the following, and they should be able to see your content. And so we believe that the way to deal with bad speech and misinformation is more speech, not less. And so that's really what drives us.
Right. Let's start with the first one, like being banned off these platforms. I've been banned off LinkedIn, like, I don't know, 7 to 10 times in the last couple of years. And yeah, I think it's because I posted too much. I also I'm 100% of the time going for truth or at least my truth, right? And I think sometimes I may hurt some feelings out there. So yeah, do you feel? I mean, being banned off X is pretty rare in the Elon era. Do you really feel that the most platforms do have that problems? What are their policies when it comes to telling a version of your truth, right? Because I mean, it's fine to discuss about the version of that truth, but if you're just like messing with the full community and not adding value to the full piece of the pie, is it fine for them to kick you out?
Yeah, under the Elon era, people are rarely suspended. Although I do know several people that have still been permanently banned from the platform for talking about something too controversial or too out there, whatever it is. And the platforms are free to do what they want. For me, what I'm more concerned about, especially in the Elon era of social media, it's different than when it was like Jack Dorsey run the show. When Jack Dorsey was running the show at Twitter, if you said the wrong thing, you faced getting kicked off the platform permanently. So like for me, I was interviewing a black conservative about why the African American community was hesitant to get vaccinated, and he brought up the Tuskegee experiments, which is where the CDC did all these experiments on African American males. Several decades ago, did not tell them, gave them syphilis. And then they had to live with that for the rest of their lives without even realizing that the diagnosis. So to me, that was completely unethical, immoral, the whole deal. And so the African American community, according to this guy who was running for Senate, was like, it's in the back of their minds. They don't trust the CDC, so that's why they're so hesitant to get vaccinated. So simply by asking that question, I was permanently banned and kicked off the platform because I was quote unquote promoting vaccine hesitancy. Now, today, under the Elon Musk era, They're not necessarily doing these permanent suspensions. You ask the wrong question, you're going to get kicked off the platform. What they're doing, instead of overt censorship, they're doing subversive censorship, which means that they're using their algorithms to limit your reach artificially. So if you're outside of the Overton window right now on X, it's, if you're a part of the hardcore MAGA crowd, or you're a part of the hardcore Democrat crowd, you kind of get boosted. And if you're outside of that Overton window and you're not necessarily talking about the same talking points, or you're not necessarily following one of those couple of narratives, what ends up happening is you get pushed off to the side. You're not seen as much. And a lot of it, some of it could be said because it's pushing a narrative. The other side could be advertising as well, because they're looking at what do the advertisers want to see, and so they can kind of pit advertisers based upon that Overton window. So what ends up happening is you get a whole host of people that have built large followings that basically don't get seen anymore because they're outside of that Overton window that they're trying to target. Which there's a whole bunch of truth and a whole bunch of really interesting conversations that are outside of that mainstream talking point and conversation and all of that. So that to me, that's where, what ends up happening is a lot of these people will begin to self-censor because they realize that the only way that I can get seen is if I start talking about these issues, if I stop talking about these other things that I'm actually interested in. And you begin this form of self-censorship, which I think is almost more sinister and actually worse to public discourse, is because now you don't have free expression. Now you're talking about what you think the algorithm wants you to talk about. And so it's almost subconsciously conditioning you to think a particular way without even realizing it. So for me, I'd rather just have free expression. People can say what they want. If you disagree with somebody, you think that something that they say is offensive or harmful or whatever it is, either you can block them, you could ignore them, you could unfollow them, or guess what? You could provide a response with a superior argument and actually prove them wrong, which I think is the best thing to do. So that's kind of our mentality with Pickax, and that's kind of my concern with not the overt censorship that we have under the Elon Musk era now, but the more subversive censorship.
But the irony here is that these social medias, they thrive off hateful conversation and people arguing with one another and posting like dramatic stuff. So why are they banning you as well? Yeah, you see like these comments, these hateful comments. I'm not sure if these profiles get actually banned, but we pretty much see influencers all the time post controversial shit and a bunch of comments. So like, are they really banning that, or are they encouraging it? I mean, on LinkedIn it's different, I think. I think a good old argument on LinkedIn, as long as it's somewhat civilized and it follows their term and condition, is gonna be kept there. But isn't that true? Like, don't they thrive, especially Facebook, off like hate and just like PD arguments?
Yeah, well, so the again, in the modern era of social media, people aren't getting banned as easily as they used to. Whereas before it was happening left or right. You say the wrong thing, you're kicked off the platform. But also at the same time, these social media platforms, it's like they ramp up the rhetoric with their algorithms, because they ended up having pushing you into your own little echo chamber. And then they will allow you to see some comments and some posts from the opposing point of view. And what ends up happening is, because you're constantly in your echo chamber and you're rarely actually challenged, and then all of a sudden you see something that is either going viral or something you disagree with, and then it's very easy to attack. Because of the way that we've all kind of been separated into our own little kind of like teams, in our own little bubbles. And so and a lot of it is because the social media platforms, they actually understand that controversy and debates and arguing with each other actually makes them more money, because if all you were posting was positive content, like puppies and kitty cats running through the fields and all that kind of stuff, you post your post, maybe you'll come back later that afternoon and you'll be like, oh, I wonder what people thought about that little kitty cat that was running through the meadows. But if you posted something controversial or you attacked somebody else, you're going to be checking in 5 minutes to see if they replied, and if you need to reply to them, and then you go back and forth. You're checking your feed all day, every day, which means more ads that you're actually seeing, because they're based upon an impressions-based advertising model. And so they actually encourage the hatred, and pitting people against each other, when in reality, all that's doing is making the money. But then the problem is that then things get ramped up too far, and then people start doing the personal insults and getting into the quote unquote hate speech and the awful rhetoric and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, then you get suspended for 12 hours or 36 hours or 72 hours, or your account gets shadow banned or whatever it is. So it's this very weird thing to where it's like they want the controversy, they want you at each other's throats, they want you fighting with each other, but then they'll also use they'll use their algorithms in order to censor you if they feel like you went off the rails. It's a very weird scenario, but it's how social media platforms make their money.
Right. And what about your social media, Pickaxe? Isn't that just a play to reunite like anti-vaxxers or I don't know, Trump supporters? Because there's the money aspect to that. Like when I open your social media, Pickaxe, that's pretty much all I see, right? Like I mean, it's a good money play, but in the end, is it like freedom of speech driven? Because I've seen these out there. They're good like money generating ventures, but like is it really that freedom of speech related? Because yeah, all I log in there seems like to be this community of conspiracy theorists sort of.
Yeah, so especially when you're dealing with like the anti-vaccine community and all that kind of stuff, they've been some of the most censored people on the planet, and so that's why we're getting a lot of them actually coming over to Pickaxe right now, is because of that kind of censorship that we've seen. So like we've had Children's Health Defense come over, which is RFK Jr.'s organization that he founded, the Daily Cloud, Naomi Wolf, Shannon Joy. We're starting to get some COVID doctors popping over and all that kind of stuff as well. Like I backed RFK Jr. when he ran for president. So I've definitely been in my share of within the anti-vaccine crowd and all of that. And I there's no qualms about that. I don't hide that. I don't cover that up. Our target audience, though, is really the center left to center right crowd. I'm not necessarily targeting the MAGA crowd. I'm not necessarily targeting the far left, although everybody is welcome onto the platform. But the thing that I realize is that kind of the center left to center right crowd and the independents and all that kind of stuff, what they end up doing is they're willing to have more nuanced conversations about controversial issues, including vaccines, including overall health, including big pharma or big ag, or and explore ideas like chemtrails and UFOs and Bigfoot and all these different kinds of things that a lot of times you're not able to truly explore on a lot of these other platforms. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to foster a lot of those conversations that you're not allowed to have on other platforms, which means we're going to have people with controversial views and interesting opinions and all that kind of stuff. And so like I don't shy away from the fact that we do have especially in these early infancy days, we're having a lot of the anti-vaccine community coming over to the platform, but it's because of our foundational principles of freedom of speech, and we're not going to limit your reach, and we're going to be rolling out more and more tools that will help anybody and everybody, whether you're controversial or not, to have more direct access to your audience that you don't get on a lot of these other platforms. So it's easy to get the people that have been hurt the most on other social media platforms to come over, but that's not necessarily the driving force of us as a platform.
Right. Yeah, it's quite interesting as a venture as well. Like, how did you build the full back end? Like with vibe coding tools nowadays, I think you can get these tools up and running pretty quick. Like, how long did it take you to build that? Did you raise money? What's the back end behind this and the timeline?
Yeah, definitely. So it took us about a year or so, maybe 13 months or so to have our MVP of the web-based version. And we built it completely native. We built it completely from scratch, and I was very intentional about that from the very beginning. So I had my team. We sat down. We had our initial brainstorming session, and I literally just sat down. I'm like, for me as a content creator, I've been a show host, I've been a writer, journalist, the whole deal for many years. And I'm like, what would be my dream scenario for a social media platform? What kind of features do I want? How do I want it structured? How do I want the algorithms? How do I want it to trend? All that kind of stuff. And then we kind of just pieced this together. But I was very intentional that I'm like, I don't want like this to take like an open source, preset conditions a platform. So like if you look at like True Social, that was built on Mastodon. I believe also Gab was also built on Mastodon. So there's a certain amount of limitations that you have when you're built using a kind of a preset platform like that. So we built ours completely from scratch to where basically I can do whatever I want with the platform. So as we grow and as we develop, there's basically no limitations as to the kind of features that we can incorporate. If I come up with an idea, we can build it. I'm not limited by anything. So that was a key feature for us building it. And then now we're doing the same thing with developing the app for iOS and Android. That's going to be coming out in about 6 to 8 weeks or so. We're in the crux of building that side of things out as well. But we built it completely native, completely from scratch. We're not doing a lot of the shortcuts that a lot of other platforms do. But it's because I'm looking at the long term. I'm looking at not necessarily what's going to get us out the fastest, but what's going to allow us to stay the longest and be able to adjust the quickest with the times. With if we need a new feature, we need to adjust. We're having an issue where maybe people like this, but they don't like this. It'll be super easy for us to take advantage of a lot of things. Whereas some of the other platforms, at a certain point, they're going to hit a wall, and then they're going to have to basically either play within those limitations, or they're just going to have to rebuild from scratch and to go native, which is what a lot of these apps do after a handful of years. They'll just completely rebuild it from scratch, as opposed to us just doing it from the beginning, and then we don't have to go through that process down the road.
Right. And your community policy, what do they look like? When does freedom of speech goes too far? Is it when I start hurting people with my words, my views? When do you actually boot someone out of the community?
So that would be if you enter into the realm of illegal activity. And so are you doxing somebody? Are you threatening? Are you trying to instigate a mob? Are you trying to overthrow the government? Like things like that, like very, very, very obvious illegal activity. Like the one quote unquote legal speech that we do ban on the platform is pornography, nudity, sex. We have software that's implemented right now that actually identifies it, and so that way it keeps it off of the platform. So that's the one thing. And I get some free speech absolutists like, how can you say you're free speech if you're banning legal speech? And I'm like, well, technically, the way that our founding fathers established the First Amendment was that you could go down to your local town square and say whatever you want without restriction. Their intention was never that you could go down, take off all your clothes in the middle of your town square, and then not go to prison. And so I'm like, if you can't do that in the middle of your town square in your city, you shouldn't do it in our digital town square on Pickax. But when it comes to things like people getting offended, or you could say it's like hate speech or all those kinds of things, we don't necessarily ban it. But one of the things that we're doing in order to severely limit it is I was doing a lot of research into a lot of these other platforms, especially Gab, because I was very concerned, because we want to be a free speech platform, but I don't want it to devolve into what's happened with Gab, where it became a cesspool of racists and white supremacists and Nazis and all that kind of stuff. And the thing that I realized as I was doing a deep dive over there is the vast, like I would argue, when I'm looking at it, 95 to 98% of that really hateful content is coming from anonymous accounts. It's coming from people that they don't put their name on there. They don't put their face on there. They may or may not be a human being, or they're probably just like a random person, and they're putting a random logo up there, and they make up a name, John 4392, and then they put out all this horrific content. So what we're doing is we are having a free verification system that's on our platform, which basically means anytime you see a blue check mark, that that's an actual real life human being that you're talking to. Now, if you're not verified, you can still be on the platform. You can post whatever kind of content you want, even if it's hateful, all that kind of stuff. But you're never going to trend. You're never going to be recommended. It's going to be almost extremely impossible for you to be discovered or to grow your account or anything along. We're going to severely limit your account from being able to be seen unless you get verified, because we want to promote human beings and we want to promote real people. And also we want to weed out a lot of that stuff, and also make it to where you're not going to have bot farms that take over our platform like you see on X and some of these other social media platforms as well. So by having this verification system, I believe we're going to be able to weed out a lot of that really bad content that a lot of people are concerned about, without us having to actually violate our conscience when it comes to freedom of speech.
Now let's talk about conspiracy theories for a moment. I understand, that most of these people have been hurt by life, and ultimately I just think the government is partly responsible for that. But like, if you want change in your own life, you need to take the own reins of your life and be responsible and fix your own shit. I understand that conspiracy is therapeutic, just like listening to sci-fi through ChatGPT before I go to bed for me is therapeutic and gets me to sleep. But the difference I think here is that when you engage into conspiracy too much and you indulge into false realities too much, you don't scale in life. You start making bad decisions and you just like go in a rabbit hole that's not helpful financially, health wise, or pretty much anything. So, like, when does one cross the line from a skeptic like me, like very science based, and my number one skill in life is that I always make good decision, like probably 95% of the time, because I'm science based, because I don't engage in conspiracy theory. So when do I cross the line between skeptic and conspiracy theory? Because there's nothing bad questioning something, um, but I do take my evidence from a bunch of plays. This podcast, deep researches is probably my favorite nowadays. Books, not that much. Anecdotally, not that much. Although I do run a bunch of tests in my life. When does that go too far, and when does that just become a hobby, engaging in conspiracy theory, and doesn't help one's life? What kind of frameworks or lens should one look at this reality to just make scientific sense out of it, and be productive, with the thing that you think and act about?
Yeah, my thing, especially when it comes to conspiracy theories, and I want to be very clear, because I think it's important that we define, because I think a lot of different people use the term conspiracy theory for different reasons, and they have different definitions of it too as well. So, like, for a lot of people, they see conspiracy theories and they define it as something that is provably false, that somebody believes, or almost like a fantasy of what's actually happening. When a reality, like for a lot of people, conspiracy theory is theorizing about something that's happening in secret. Like, a conspiracy is something where two or more people are actually conspiring secretly behind the scenes in order to accomplish something, or whatever it is, working behind the scenes, things that are happening in secret.
And
Now,
I would add, with very
yeah,
few empirical evidence. Like, for example, Joe Rogan's definitely on that scale. I love Joe, by the way, but he's definitely a conspiracy theorist when it comes to UFOs or the pyramids of Egypt, or even like the big vax to some degree. Like, I think vaccines have had a very net positive impact on the full population. Obviously, the government overran its power. That's total bullshit for sure. But I think a bunch of people against the vaccines, like, the science is pretty clear, right? Like, that this has been helpful. Obviously, there's been some bad stuff in the cracks, but I think overwhelmingly it's been positive. So that also falls in my
yeah.
conspiracy theorist category.
Yeah, well, and I think that here's the crux of it, especially when we're talking about like conspiracy theories, and I think that the vaccines, I think are a really good thing. I've always told everybody, and with my shows, whenever I interview anybody, all that kind of stuff, I've always said I'm willing to I'm willing to hear anybody's theory, but I'm going to have to at least have enough evidence to be able to say that, okay, this is something that even could happen, right? This is something, there could be some truth. Maybe we need to do some more investigation. Maybe we need to figure it out. But I also caution a lot of people, don't just run with your conspiracy theory as if it is true. But we also have to be careful that we don't say, just because it's a conspiracy theory that hasn't been proven yet, that it's false, right? So I always try to put everything into like four different buckets: either something that I know is not true, or something that I know is true. Those are the two that I rarely actually fill. The vast majority of the rest of the things are things that are probably true or probably false. But I rarely give it 100% either way, because I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I can only theorize based upon the information that I'm given, but I could be given bad information. The government could be giving me bad information. This doctor could be giving me bad information. I don't know, and I have to be very humble about the fact that I don't know everything. But also, when it comes to vaccines, I think that what's happened, and yes, there's been a lot of people that have gone overblown. I've heard all the ridiculous, crazy conspiracy theories, but also there's a lot of evidence that would show that, sure. And I actually talked to Mary Holland, who's the head of Children's Health Defense, which is RFK Jr.'s organization that he founded. And again, they're always labeled conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers and all that kind of stuff. But I remember talking to her, and we were talking about like the measles outbreak, and we had this conversation that, yes, if you want to avoid getting measles, the most effective thing that you could do is to get vaccinated. Like, it is effective at stopping you from contracting measles. Now, there's an entirely different conversation about are there side effects that are being covered up? And I think that there's at the very least enough evidence to show that we should be investigating this more and diving into this more, and not just shutting down mothers with children that have had vaccine injuries, or had an injury. Like for example, I think a great example is that if there was a study that was done that showed that 90% of babies with SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, who died in their beds, whatever it is, they had been vaccinated, I believe, within the last like 3 days or 5 days. There was a particular study that pointed that out. Now, I learned in college, just because there's a correlation does not equal causation. But if there's a number that's like that, that should be investigated. Now, a lot of people will immediately make the leap to say, see, this proves X, Y, and Z. It doesn't prove it, but it shows that there is a commonality there. There is a potential for a causality there that we should explore. And that's where we should be theorizing in order to asking the questions, is there something here? The problem that we have is that you have big pharma and historically the NIH and the CDC and the FDA and the HHS, which will then just poo-poo in any question about any of these vaccines and say, look, there's nothing there. You're just a conspiracy theorist. You're a quack. It hasn't been proven X, Y, and Z. I think that the problem is that you're silencing so many of these young mothers, and I know many of them personally that have children that they firmly believe are vaccine injured because they took their kids in to get vaccines, and then a few days later, maybe less than a week later, all of a sudden the child's personality changed. They started getting some sort of chronic disease like within an extremely short period of time. I think that there is some legitimate questions as to the legitimacy of whether or not you should be forced to vaccinate your kids, which out here in the state of California, if you want to send your kids to school, you are forced to vaccinate your kids. And there's actually times where CPS will come in and take children away from their parents for not getting a vitamin K shot at birth or not getting a hepatitis B shot at birth. To me, that's a problem, especially when they try to shut down any and all conversation about the potentials of side effects and vaccine injuries. And so I think we have to be careful that we don't go too far one way, where we start just believing every single conspiracy theory that under mankind. But we also have to be careful the other way to not throw the baby out with the bathwater and act like all or all conspiracy theories are false, when in reality, there's a lot of legitimate questions that need to be explored that it's just they're not being answered. And a lot of times we're seeing these big corporations are covering it up and ensuring that we can't study these issues legitimately. And then you start asking why. That's when you start getting into the conspiracy theory stuff. And that's where you theorize, but you can't act like it's fact. But we should be free to explore these things without getting the pejorative of, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. And it's used to discredit you, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Just think that most humans think emotionally, like at least 90 to 95% of humans think with their emotions, not their fact. As soon as their brains find a correlation with a personal experience that helps them achieve their goals, they're going to go with that. And labeling people as conspiracy theorists won't help. So I do think we need like a discourse. We need to talk about these things. So very good point there. Jeff, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, definitely. Best place, obviously, would be to go to pickax.com, pickax.com. It's obviously my primary social media platform now since I built it. But if you guys follow me over there, but you guys can also subscribe to my account over there as well. I send out an email newsletter. We actually have an email newsletter feature directly in our platform. So you just subscribe, you'll get my articles and shows and all that kind of stuff emailed directly to you. I'm talking a lot about AI, transhumanism, social media, censorship, all that kind of stuff. So definitely, go over to pickaxe.com and set up an account and follow me over there.
Okay, so that was Jeff and Charles for another Founder Wisdom